Hello and welcome to the first ever book haul on this channel. I wasn't going to do book hauls on here, but you guys seem to really like them. And also I started this series a few months ago called TBR Tours, in which I talk about all the unread books on my shelves divided into categories. And now I have new non-fiction that doesn't appear in my TBR Tours installment for non-fiction or anywhere else on my channel, and I just can't allow that to happen. And then, most of the time when I want to read a specific book, I have to buy it. I don't have the luxury of just going to the library and checking it out. So I always have to spend money. And I figured, if I have to spend so much money on these books, I want to show them off. I want to give them a little screen time, because who knows when I will get to read them and to wrap them up. That said, I got half the books in this haul used, so I didn't spend a fortune on them, just half a fortune. So without further ado, here are all the books that I bought in October. But first, before we get to the fun recreational part of the show, I don't typically do this, but this time I just have to mention a rather heavy academic read first, because this month a new book was published in a long-standing established series that for decades has brought us groundbreaking treatises in the field of ancient history. So this is pretty much required reading for me as a historian of ancient history. And since it is going to be so groundbreaking to our field of study, I just want to do it the honor of briefly mentioning it here. You may already have guessed what I'm talking about. Of course, I am talking about the new Asterix. This is the German translation, just to make it more easily digestible for me, this heavy read. This is, in English, this would be called The Daughter of Vercingetorix. Since this might actually be a bit of general interest, I might even mention it in my next wrap-up. Stay tuned for that. And then I bought a non-fiction book that I've had sort of in the periphery of my focus for the past few months. Feet in the Clouds by Richard Askwith. This is a history of fell running and of prominent fell runners. Now, fell is the word for hills and mountain ranges that is used in northern England and to describe northern English hills and mountain ranges, most prominently the hills of the Lake District. Now, the difference between fell running and normal hill and mountain running is that it is much more technical typically. Hill running is mainstream hill running, if there is such a thing, is usually done on mountain tracks and dirt roads, so it is exhausting and hard on your legs, but not necessarily very tactical. Whereas fell running is typically done on very narrow trails, if at all, and is extremely technical, and fell runners have to concentrate really hard on where they are stepping with every step. For me, actually, hill running is the only form of running that I am really interested in, both passively and actively. And fell running would be sort of my dream. It would be my dream that I would be able to do fell running just in my spare time. But alas, there are no fells and hardly any hills around here. I have been trying to get back into hill running, or as much hill running as I can do around here, but I've been injured for a few months now. So I don't know if this is the best of times to read this book or the worst of times. We shall see. It might take a while before I pick this up. And since it is October, I've been very much in the mood for mysteries, so I bought a couple, but of course I haven't gotten around to reading any of them yet. But at least the first of them sounds very much like it fits the November mood as well. It is Knots and Crosses by Ian Rankin. This was published in 1987, and it is usually considered one of the formative and representative books of the tarte noir genre, dark and gritty crime novels set in Scotland. This is the very first case of Inspector Rebus from Edinburgh, who has to hunt down a serial killer before he murders again. So a pretty standard police procedural plotline. I suppose it's the setting, Edinburgh, that sets the book apart from other crime and police procedural novels, which is absolutely fine with me. Next I have A Perfect Spy by John le Carré. I have never read a classic spy thriller, I think, and this seems to be John le Carré's most acclaimed work. It was first published in 1986, and it is more than a little inspired by the historical person of Kim Philby. Kim Philby was one of the so-called Cambridge Five, a circle of spies for the Soviet Union that operated in Cambridge from the 1930s to the 1950s. In this book, the main character, MI6 officer Magnus Pym, simply vanishes one day, and the truth about his identity and his past activities as a double agent are slowly revealed. I am a bit hesitant about this book and spy thrillers in general because they usually operate with a good portion of a glorification of nationalist thinking to affect their readership. But I'm curious about it, and it was €1.50, so no harm done, I guess. And the rest, 7 books, are all fantasy books of very different kinds. The first is The Girl Who Fell Beneath Fairyland and Led the Revels There by Catherynne Valente. This is the second book in the Fairyland series. The first book, The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making, I own but haven't read yet, so this was a bit of a gamble. But I found this used in great condition, so I guess it was a risk worth taking. In this series, this whole series was published in our decade, and it is a classic portal fantasy, in which the girl September from Omaha makes several trips to Fairyland and has all sorts of adventures there, and misadventures, I guess. Next I have 2 young adult fantasy books, which was also a bit of a gamble, because I have become very disenchanted and careful with young adult books. But I also found them used, and I figured, oh well, if they turn out to be good, I will have 2 cheap and gorgeous looking copies of 2 very good books for my shelves. So the first book I bought, I guess, needs very little introduction. It is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This was a very much hyped book a couple of years ago. It is about the title character Laszlo Strange, who is a librarian in a fantasy world, and it is about the search for a lost city in which Laszlo participates. The second book, State of Sorrow by Melissa Salisbury. This one's a bit of a puzzle, even for myself. I was intrigued by the title first and foremost. From what I gather from the blurb, this is about a fantasy kingdom in which sorrow reigns, both figuratively and literally, in that the girl Sorrow, that's her actual name, her father is the king or head of state in her fantasy country, and he got so overwhelmed with grief after the death of his son, Sorrow's brother, that he has ever since been unable to govern his country, and in fact Sorrow secretly governs in his stead. And now she is apparently facing all kinds of challenges in this position. I hope that even though this is a YA book, the main character isn't all that young, because incredibly savvy teenage characters who rule the world in place of the clueless adults is a trope that I've never been really fond of. And with the next 2 books, I am a total fashion victim, because they have gotten quite some hype recently. But at least the first one seems to be smack in the middle of my comfort zone, and I've been really in the mood for some epic fantasy, so I picked up Foundryside. This, I gather, is about a thief who finds herself in the middle of a clash between rival factions in her country and in the capital of her country. I said that this is epic fantasy, but just leafing through this, I have gotten the suspicion that this actually has a bit of a twist element in comparison with classic epic fantasy. We'll see. My next fashion victim book is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is about a girl who basically goes to assassin school to become an assassin and avenge her family and I think her whole village who have been brutally murdered. This sounds a bit like it is grimdark fantasy without being actually grimdark, so I hope that this isn't in fact borderline young adult, because I have made enough gambles for 1 month with buying young adult books. Yeah. My second to last book is a fantasy classic, Alphabet of Thorn by Patricia and McKillip. I can't quite decide if this is the prettiest cover ever or the most disgusting cover ever. I sort of wish that it were a bit more stylized, more Art Nouveau-ish. I guess that would be more to my taste, but I'm growing more and more fond of it, and who knows, I think this might actually be perfect for Patricia and McKillip's writing style. I'm very curious to find out just how much they fit together. And my last book isn't actually a new book. I have already read this quite recently, but I didn't have a hard copy of it. I only had it in ebook form, but I loved it so much that I just had to get a physical copy. I'm talking about The Sorcerer of the Wildeeps by Ashante Wilson. This has been one of my favorite reads of 2019, or indeed ever. The basic plotline of this is that 2 demigods are escorting a merchant caravan through an oasis in the desert, the Wildeeps, which is a sort of portal between worlds and times, and there all sorts of supernatural threats lurk in the shadows. The road through the Wildeeps is usually protected by magic, or is it science? But apparently there has been some sort of leak and the beasts are roaming free. But this doesn't really begin to cover what this book is really about. I have done a video review of just this book in which I talk about why I love it so much and how complex it really is. I will link that review down below for you. And that's it. That's my October haul. There are a few books on this pile that I would like to get to sooner rather than later, but in general I'd be happy to buddy read any book that I show to you. If you'd be interested in buddy reading any of those books, just drop me a message in the comments or as a private message, and then we can talk specifics there. I'll be back very soon with a recent reads video and give you some more quality content. Until then, have a nice day. Bye.